Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for spending time with me again today on Innerviews, where we talk to the people behind the businesses. And today I'm chatting with Caroline McCann. Caroline, please will you tell us a little bit more about your business and why you started it?
Hi, thank you so much. My business is Braeside Meat Market, and I've had it for the last 21 years. I actually bought it in what was supposed to be a gap year. I'd been in quite a serious corporate position, and my aunt owned the butchery. So she lured me in by saying, buy the butchery. People always buy meat, and after a year, you can sell it. So 21 years later and a whole bunch of lessons later, here I am.
And why have you held on to it, even though it was only supposed to be a one-year project?
Mostly because it proved to be such an interesting challenge. The first 3 years I spent having to learn a brand new skill set of cutting meat. Until then, I barely cooked, let alone cut anything. And basically from then until now, the last 18 years, I've been one of the foremost champions on free-range, grass-fed and organic meat, doing traceability directly from small-scale farmers to consumers.
Wow, that's interesting. You must have been a real innovator because it's trending now, but you must have been one of the earliest adopters.
Yes, I was, and it was interesting because when I started talking about free range and grass fed, it happened because I'd done a trip to the UK, and having had the business for 3 years, I was in this headspace where either I needed to do something more with it or I needed to get out. Because while meat is enjoyable, it can become quite tedious if it's the same thing day in and day out. And so off to the UK, met the most fabulous butchers who all kept telling me about the breed of animal, the farmers, where the farm was situated, what the animals were eating. And I came back thinking, oh, this is so amazing. I'm going to start doing the same. And I was horrified to find out from my then meat supplier, Karen Beef, that they were a feedlot and that everything that I wanted out of meat was not what they did. And so really that's what got me into it. And that's what's been driving me for the last, what is it now, 16, 18 years.
So you then had to find new suppliers from scratch?
Find new suppliers from scratch, and almost as difficult, start telling consumers that they actually had a choice when it came to meat. Because up until then, and in fact even now, the entire meat industry has been based around the system that meat is meat. So that the moment you want to start saying something like free range, grass fed, even something as silly as delicious or tender, you have to go through an entire governmental approved process just to be able to say that. And so that's really where this whole thing gained momentum. And it wasn't just a simple question of come up with a new marketing strategy. It was redesign the entire meat industry to be able to make these claims and link small scale producers to consumers.
Wow, that's so interesting. So it's a very regulated industry.
Very regulated and on every scale, which I think to a large extent has been one of the major barriers of entry when it comes to doing online sales.
What made you shift to doing online sales?
So having spent so many years fighting government and finally getting approval for protocols to be able to claim free range grass fed, having worked with international organizations around good, clean and fair food, slow food, for example, and a couple of other conservation organizations, I realized that as much as I could tell the story about selling, what I couldn't actually do was talk about online selling. And so in 2016, I started spending a lot of time looking at what online selling looked like around the world. I knew that that's where the market was headed, even though South Africa, we're far behind, depending on the industry, anywhere from 5 to 8 years behind trends. And I wanted to make sure that I understood it enough to apply to Braeside. And so that's what happened is I spent a whole year reading as much as I possibly could, speaking to some people overseas, and in 2017 put up my very first online store.
And how did that go?
Shockingly bad.
I think a lot of entrepreneurs have had that experience.
The difficulty then, again, we're talking 2017, is that I didn't know anywhere near enough about computers and programs and stuff like that. So I worked with the guy who did my website, really great guy, and he had actually worked on the Pick and Pay online store. He was one of the co-creators on the team that set up Pick and Pay's first online store. And so he's a complete and utter IT guru, and he'd use words like integration, and I'd just blank out. And so he did the store, but he didn't know meat. And I think that's possibly the biggest lesson that I've learned, is that we get better sales now because the person who's doing it is the person who knows meat, and it just so happens to be me.
Okay. So you're actually building your online store yourself?
So Peter did a great job, and the same site that he did in 2017 is still there. It's WooCommerce on a WordPress platform. However, all the plugins that I've been using in the last, basically since end of last year till now, are ones that I've familiarized myself with, because I've understood where the process falls down. And so as a result, the upskilling, my own personal upskilling, I think is probably the second most important thing that I would say to anyone who's doing an online store.
Okay.
Don't just leave it to some famous, important, specialized person. Get a basic understanding of what is possible.
Okay, that's very interesting feedback. A lot of people think that if you've paid an expert lots of money to do it, it's going to work.
No. It'll work to an extent, and it might look sexy as all hell, but it's not necessarily going to be a great fit for you. And I think that's a big lesson.
Okay. I know that many years ago I spent a lot of money getting some fancy web developers to develop a really amazing website for me. But it was only functional for about a year, because the following year, when I needed to change things, I couldn't afford them anymore. And then I was stuck for a year or two where things were just in kind of hanging in limbo, where I was afraid to take it back for myself. And the old system wasn't serving me, and I kept trying to save the money to get there, and it wasn't happening. And it can be a very frustrating process.
It really can. And I think that there's two parts to this. One is that if you don't know enough of the basics, then you're going to be led down a very expensive and probably not very functional path. But the second is that not every solution is a very expensive package or plugin, and that it really is worth your while taking that time, thinking about what it is you need, and researching, because the time spent researching is going to save you money, but it's also going to save you duplication and frustration.
Those are very useful insights. Thank you. Now, it sounds as though you've shifted your business model many times through this period. I know that the word pivoting has become kind of a catchphrase during COVID-19, but it sounds like you've done that several times. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. Well, I no longer call it pivoting. It's a pirouette.
And you've gotten good at them, it sounds like.
So good. I even do a little plie at the end.
That's right. And what normally prompts these shifts?
So it's interesting that 2017 was because I was starting to feel very uncomfortable with having to pay landlords huge amounts of money. I understood that that Braeside I was fortunate, actually, a business that had been in media a lot. I was appearing in TV shows and radio ads and radio shows, etc., etc. And so I was quite fortunate because we're gaining quite a good known presence. And I kept thinking, well, what am I doing? Paying, for example, in Parkhurst, 100,000 Rand a month rent to a landlord who wouldn't fix the leaking ceiling and actually doesn't bring the feet in. And that there needed to be a different way of doing it. And so that's what started me down this path. In those days, I had a massive deboning factory. I had 3 retail stores. And so for me, and I was playing in the space of markets. And so for me, it really was a question of, okay, I need to change because the world is going to change and I need to keep up. So first change was that. It was partly crazy rents and partly understanding that the world was changing. The second big change came when I, as blessed as I am to have incredible friends in hospitality, well-known 5-star restaurants and hotels, etc., etc., getting money from them is awkward and difficult, and truly it made no sense. Smallest margin, most amount of overhead expenses just to get that money in, that it didn't matter that those were big numbers in turnover. It actually isn't smart business to make. And so I wanted to go more direct to consumer. And that second quarter pirouette, half pirouette, was to then close the deboning plant and to try and bring everything into 2 retail spaces. And at that point, I truly concentrated on online sales, but with only a meat lens. The last bit of changing happened when, unbeknownst to me, the landlord had illegally extended the building that I was in, and the city of Joburg shut us down in 1 week. We were given an eviction. Wow. And the building was condemned, and it was this great big huge, what am I going to do? And I say thank you for that, actually, looking back, because it forced me to say, right, my business is now almost exclusively an online. And so what does that mean? And what are the additional things that people would want? Because the truth is that meat is great, but you're not just going to buy meat online. You want to buy more. And so those have been all the things really that have led me to this. COVID was just a bonus. It wasn't a pivot as such.
Well, it's very interesting hearing you say that COVID is a bonus. So many people have viewed it as the worst thing that's ever happened. So it's wonderful to hear somebody who's had a positive outcome from the whole thing.
Yeah, but I also, with respect, over the 21 years of being in business, I've realized that there's only a small little percentage of people who are able to take the absolute worst circumstances and figure out how to make it work for them. And it's not a good or a bad, it just is what it is. And so it's very sad for what's happened in our economy. And I truly do feel I've got great friends and family who've been completely wiped out. But for the few of us who've been able to think that way and find ways, yeah, it's been a blessing.
And I bet that you're delighted you don't have that 100,000 Rand rental hanging over your head during COVID-19.
Absolutely. It's also been interesting because I've been able to find and learn about ways of marketing and selling to people that I haven't in the past.
What ways are those?
So getting to grips with Facebook, getting to grips with WhatsApp. Actually, I'm quite surprised at how amazing WhatsApp has been during COVID. I would say that's a lesson. I'm trying to think of what else. Those are the 2 that have been the most remarkable. Oh, I lie. And a beautiful little plugin that I discovered to create an affiliates program. And so my partner who I brought into Braeside keeps calling it the Tupperware party of meat, because now we can have people in different areas pulling out their steak, telling their friends, buy, and use this code, and they get both the commission and we get the extra business.
Oh, that's very, very clever. Wow.
Yeah. So
that's awesome. So what plugin is that?
It's called the affiliates program. Sorry, affiliate plugin. Best thing ever.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to go looking for that one.
You absolutely do. Let's create more Tupperware parties.
And it's amazing that that model still works so many years later. Sorry, I was just writing that down. I don't want to forget it.
No, absolutely. I'll tell you why I do believe it works. Is the only reason my business gained traction and success and notice when I went from just another butcher to someone who specializes in this field, it was because of individual people who heard what I had to say, checked me out and said, actually, you know what, Caroline, there's something to this, I'm going to tell my friends. And so your best referral is always going to be a personal experience that's positive, telling that to another person.
Yes.
So
yes. That's great insight. It's great insight. So I'm very curious about your story, because so many entrepreneurs kind of have this vision for their business going forward, that over 20 years their business will just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And it seems as though you got bigger and now have made it smaller and tidier, and that's working better for you.
Yes, I have a very outspoken view on this. I blame this idea that growth means bigger, and that growth actually is success, and we measure our success by growth. It's completely and utterly wrong. I think it is the death knell for way too many entrepreneurs. very few businesses are businesses that are scalable to the extent that they become the next, in retail terms, Pick and Pay, Food Lovers, etc. Very, very few. Take-A-Lot is an unusual business for that exact same reason. That not every online store is the next Take-A-Lot or is the next whatever the case may be. To some extent, it's determined on the person, but to a large extent, that's the nature of business. Because if every business was capable of being the next big, massive, multinational, then why doesn't that happen? And so I remain committed to the principle, and I tell everyone this, that true success is determined by permanently being able to extract maximum value out of what you have. And very seldom that means going bigger and bigger and bigger. Actually, what it means is just becoming better and better at what you do. So
I love that. I love that. Thank you. You've given me a new frame on my own business.
Trust me, I learned a lot of expensive lessons, and that one is worth an MBA.
So, what have been your biggest challenges in the last 20 odd years of being in business for yourself?
I'm going to start off with the obvious one of people in the form of staff. Okay. Staff. And it hurts me to say this, but the quality of people who are on the job market is so depressingly bad. I don't know how we fix this as a nation, but it's a South African problem, and we better get it sorted out really soon, because it doesn't matter what industry we're talking about. It doesn't matter what category we're speaking to. That is our biggest problem. We seem to suffer from a narcissistic sense of immediate rewards, and that affects the way people do their job. The most amount of money right now on my terms, and you as the boss owe me, and that doesn't work.
I've felt for a long time that if people who are working for bosses had to run their own businesses for a little while, they'd have a very different attitude if they knew how difficult it was to actually create a job for another person.
Absolutely. And I think that as employers, we are expected to do miracles, because the truth is that the starting input is a person and their attitude. And you think you've got the right attitude till 3 months in, and before you know it, all of this narcissistic immediate meeting of my demands comes out. It's rough. It truly is difficult. And yet, having said that, I've got some gems. I've got one guy at Bryanston Organic Market, Sidwell, who is the best advert for Braeside. Been with me for 18 years, cuts like an absolute dream, is the most amazing man, would bend over backwards. And so, but it's just what you have to go through to find the gems that makes it hard.
So they're a minority out there.
They are.
That's interesting. So how do you overcome challenges when you're sourcing staff? Do you have a very strict kind of intake process? Do you have people on probation before you sign them up permanently? How are you kind of mitigating some of those risks?
I've tried it all. I've tried very strict criteria, and if you haven't met this, then you don't move on. I've tried as part of the interview process, hands-on practical things to show me, can you cut? Do you actually know how a computer works? Can you answer the telephone politely when 3 other phones are ringing? I've tried every single thing in the book. I've tried making it loosey-goosey. Probation is an absolute guarantee. People always start on probation. But the truth is that it takes about 3 months before a person just settles into letting their true self come forward. And it's really generally at that point that even if they don't have the skills, if that attitude is wrong, I let them go. I've learned, you can train skill, you can't train attitude.
That's a very important insight. Thank you.
Sure.
And what have been your favorite parts of being self-employed?
I love the challenge of finding the what's next. So I like that. I like saying, okay, great. So if this is the world now, 2 years from now, what's the world going to look like? And can I take this business that I have and make it right for it? Love that. My absolute best.
So you really are an Imagineer.
Great word, yes.
And if you were to meet an entrepreneur out there who's thinking of going into the meat business, what advice would you give to them?
It's difficult. Perhaps that would be it. It is difficult. It's one of the few industries that you can buy something at, like lambs at the moment, 100 Rand a kilo, sell it for 200 Rand and still make a loss, because there are things that vanish that you can't control. There's everything from blood loss to cutting loss to packaging that suddenly comes into play, to people, to preferences, to all sorts of things that make it an incredibly difficult, from that perspective, it's an incredibly difficult business. But I guess at the end of the day, it would be just know your customer.
And I'm sure that stock control is also something that's pretty tricky in an industry where your product is perishable.
Absolutely. And where you buy a whole, but not everyone wants the whole.
Yes.
You buy an entire carcass, beef carcass, 10% of that are primal cuts, your rump, your sirloin, your fillet. 30% of that is fat that no one wants. Another 15% are bones that are very difficult to help people understand the benefit of bones, and you still don't get anywhere near the amount of money that you paid for it. And the last little bit are, let's call it the imaginative items, the things that people might buy once off because you spark their imagination. So that's what makes it difficult, is balancing that out and creating a demand for each of those different things.
I know I'm very lucky at the moment. We have access to lamb directly off a farm. And the quality is so beautiful that I'm actually quite happy to buy the whole thing with all the bones and all the fat. And I'm loving cooking with the bones and fat. It makes such beautiful soups and stews and things.
Absolutely. So the second business that I have is a consulting business, which is actually why I took a partner on in Braeside. Because over the last 4 years, I've landed up doing a lot of work with environmental organizations in particular, some broad-based livelihoods, consulting, etc., etc. And what I find so remarkable is that people forget you can't go to a farm and say, listen, won't you just grow me 10 rump and 12 fillet?
Yes.
The farmer's growing the whole thing. And when you say to the farmer, what do you eat? The farmers are eating the low and slow cook, the stuff that takes forever, the unusual bits, because they've not been influenced by city life of everything immediate and now. And I want my delivery in 30 minutes and that pizza bedded darn will still be warm.
Yes.
Yeah, and for me, that's what I find so remarkable. So when you're living a slow life on a farm, you're still cooking and eating everything. It's only us city folk that get it wrong.
Yes. It's quite interesting. I encountered somewhere in one of the networks a lady who is trying to live a more sustainable life. And what she actually does is she eats only the offal and the bits that nobody else wants. Because she's kind of walking her talk and trying to show people that, you've got to eat the whole animal. You can't just eat these bits and not those ones.
Yeah. And from a nutrient point of view, what I call recovering vegans are the best people to speak to about this. If you're not getting in all the nutrients that are to be found across the food spectrum, which actually includes animals, as human beings, you get desperately ill. And when it comes to meat, it's, you can't just live on fillet alone, besides from it being expensive, but from a nutrient level, your body needs that. That's health.
Yes, that's very interesting. And do you ever end up with stock that reaches its sell-by date and then you don't know what to do with it?
No.
Okay. Not willing to do that.
No, and you know what? Because I'm blessed to have these incredible chefs who are part of my network. They've taught me so much that there's always a way to help the consumer understand that you can buy this and do it in a different way. And so when we know that something is getting to its sort of maximum aged date, if you will, that I'm able to share a recipe and get people excited about cooking something with it.
Wow, that's a wonderful proactive way of looking at solving that challenge. Okay, so if you have any parting words for people watching out there about their purchasing choices around meat.
There are a couple of rules which I think apply throughout life. The first is know what it is that you're buying. The second is know from whom you're buying it. The last is pause and think about, does that R5 that you've just spent make a difference, an immediate difference to a person in your immediate circle or not? And if it doesn't, perhaps you're spending it in the wrong place.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Thank you.
You're welcome. Those are the 3 rules to live by.
That's awesome. So if anybody would like to get in touch with you, where can they find you online, Caroline?
Online is shop.braesidebutchery.co.za. We're on Facebook as Braeside Butchery, and we have a WhatsApp and call line 082 456 4570. And we'd be happy to chat about eating animals and all the lovely bits in between.
Okay, and just for those who are watching, could you spell Braeside? I know how it's spelled, but I suspect some people out there may not know.
Absolutely. It's Braeside, Braeside.
Thank you so much for this wonderful conversation today. You've had a really inspiring story to tell.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.